Let me ask you about like your nonfiction stuff.
Sure.
Your Broadway show, the new one, and your new book coming out about the apprehension.
This is my copy, by the way.
Phenomenal book, and I'll hold it up the right way, not like the Bible. Wow. You talk a lot about your apprehensions about being a father, and that's something all of us as fathers, I think, can relate to. But it is so authentic and raw in a way that very little I see in life, even among, not on film or on stage, but just in interactions with even my friends. Like, people are masked, and you ripped off the mask. How hard is that to do? Like, to do it every night, first on stage and now on Netflix and in a book?
Gosh, it's a complex answer. And I think Brian would have a similar feeling about writing fiction, which is like, in some ways, it's very hard, because you don't want to reveal things about yourself that are wrong, that I'm not as good a dad as I'd want to be, that I wasn't as good, at, being a part of my family, early on, that I went to the red light district when I was 23, that, just on and on and on and on about these things that are things I'm ashamed of and I'm not proud of. And it's hard to make that plunge. That's the difficult part of it. The not difficult part of it is sort of like, as an autobiographical storyteller, once you understand, which happened to me like in my late 20s, I would say, artistically, once you understand that authenticity is the only way to heal yourself and others, and to be honest about your own flaws is the only path to reaching anyone, then it's not hard. Then the choice is made. It's like, well, am I going to open up and attempt to connect, or am I going to close myself off and attempt to be cool? And it's like, so in some ways there's no choice other than to be completely embarrassed all the time.
The book is really about like you being not ready for fatherhood in the play. And Brian, you've raised one of the more amazing kids I've ever come across in Sam. Did you go through this? Like, did you go through it, my kid? Like, are you cut out to be a father? And how'd you, did you struggle with it, and how'd you deal with it?
You don't know Anna, but when I was saying,
I was going to chime in. I was going to chime in
Mike
too.
Knows Anna.
I was going to say the other one. The other one's great too.
Anna's awesome and a great writer. I always find this to be, and I agree with everything Mike said about being authentic. And even in all the characters that I may write, Dave and I will write, there's something of yourself that you're putting in as you get inside their skin. There's something that, a way to understand them through understanding how you might be in their shoes, even characters who do bad things. So I agree with that. And I write, when I'm writing essays, I'm obviously writing from that place too. The fatherhood
different, Brian, right? Isn't the difference like you can hide behind, even if
you can until there's a body of work, right? After 25 years of doing this, there are themes that are in my work that are inescapable. And so that there's no way that someone wouldn't know something about the way that Dave and I look at the world if they watch the body of work, and the essays and social media, all of it. And my podcast, I've done hundreds and hundreds of hours of the moment. And in a way that I'm forced to try to be the same person in front of the microphone that I am not. The fatherhood question is really hard to answer. First of all, it's not a solo job, right? It's you, and for me, it's you and your partner if you are two people. If you're doing it alone, I had unbelievable admiration for you. But for me, it wasn't a solo job. It was me and Amy. So it was the two of us parenting. I will say I took it unbelievably seriously from the beginning. I choose my words carefully because I'm also really I always try to be very sure not to try to give advice in this area, because I don't really think it's replicable necessarily. I think I was born with kids who were a certain way. My kids were born a certain way. Amy and I had a certain approach that worked in a certain way for us and our kids. A huge part of it is that Amy and I really like each other. So our kids were raised in a home where the two of us really liked each other. And we really liked being parents. Now, the first year Sam was born, I was playing a lot of poker because I was writing the first movie and because I was a degenerate poker player. But I was always like, I would go out and play poker when Sam fell asleep, and I would be home, and I was pretty active in their lives, you know. And I would say maybe that's the one fair piece of advice. It's like every minute you put in with your kids where you're being intentional comes back in hours and years of reward you get. And so it's worth it. It's worth every second that you can give to it because the reward on the other side is so wonderful. For me, anyway, that's what I found.
Both of you strike me as people who are like not half-assed about stuff. Like you know, like if you do something, like it seems like, I mean, anything. I mean, food, like, you know, like, yeah, you know, like we all like food, but man, you do it in like a whole different way. You know, the chefs, you know, every little ingredient that they've got and so on. And Mike, the same thing for you. You know, that intensity that you bring is really, to me, an interesting feature about both of you guys. Just Brian, on that, I just have one question about restaurant. I mean,
ask anything you want.
You have so many friends now who are like, I'm sure, suffering so much, chefs and others. And what's going to happen to restaurants? I've seen David, even if someone as successful as David Chang has to close restaurants, what does that mean for restaurants in New York?
I've had a number of conversations with Dave Chang, and if anyone's going to figure this out, it's Dave. He's like he is a brilliant person and a really rigorous. Talk about rigor and commitment. That guy's got huge rigor and commitment. Yeah, I feel terrible for my friends who are restaurants. They're suffering. They're all trying to find new ways. I'm talking to many of them all the time, trying to connect, trying to offer whatever I can in terms of support and encouragement. I think these people will find a way to reinvent the restaurant business because it's always been an incredibly hard business. It's always been a business with thin margins and few superstars. And I feel terrible for the workforce, Neal, the big, huge workforce, maybe more than for the owners who I think are going to figure it out because they're smart. And as I said, rigorous, you know. And I do agree, like Mike is as serious about, I mean, nobody's more serious about Lombardi's than Mike Birbiglia. This is the pizza place. And this, I mean, Mike Birbiglia knows everything. He can probably tell you when the pizza's, which table's in there where the pizza's just at a slight angle and how the cheese is going to pool and maybe figures out what seat. That's how well he knows that place.
Yeah, well, I don't know about that, but I do know that Mike really cares a ton about supporting live comedy and clubs all around the country that are struggling. And, you know, right when coronavirus hit, he started doing these Instagram lives every day, which I watched like the first 25 of. I can't believe I was able to put that work aside for that long, but they were so good and so interesting, but also just so moving to be supporting all these clubs. Mike, what is going to happen to live comedy and what can we do?
Well, I started this thing. It's called Tip Your Waitstaff, and people can go on tipyourwaitstaff.com, which is surprising that URL was available at that point, but tipyourwaitstaff.com is our URL, and it basically points to different GoFundMe's for waitstaff across the country and at 50 different comedy clubs, and we've raised over $500,000 all told. And it basically came to me because I was driving when the COVID shutdowns started happening. I was driving to Buffalo, New York, to a comedy club to work on new material. And I got to Utica and I stopped and I was having pizza. And I was at the communal pizzeria table. And I was with these two strangers and I was really on top of all of the reporting on the virus. But then these people were like, we're starting to think this is serious. And I could just tell, I was like, I gotta go home. I cannot have a communal gathering in Buffalo, and so I just drove home after that. And so when I drove home, it occurred to me, well, what's the Helium Comedy Club wait staff going to do this weekend when there's no shows? They work on tips, and then what's the Bloomington, Indiana Comedy Addict staff going to do the next week where I'm supposed to be? And so that's where the idea came of just bouncing ideas around with comics, and so then that was. John Mulaney did it, and Sarah Silverman, and a whole bunch of Hannibal Buress, great comics, and we raised money. But I think no one has the answer for what happens to live comedy. But I will say that I think that it exists. I think it continues to exist because I think there's something about the experience of being in a group of people watching a live comedy show. And everyone, people who are older than you, younger than you, different races than you, all laughing at the same thing at the same time in the same room. And I feel like it took me until now, when we're doing all these virtual things, to understand that that's the thing that's different.
Thanks for watching The New Normal. Stay tuned for more. Indeed, next week, I'll be doing a special episode all geared towards the release of Hamilton, the musical, on Disney streaming.